Thank you. My name's Richard. This is a question for Satish. Did you enjoy meeting Richard Dawkins, and what do you think of him?
Yes, I did enjoy meeting him because it is good to meet someone you are not quite on the same wavelength. Because it's always easy to talk to people who agree with you and you are on the same wavelength. But it was good to, and at one point he said, maybe we agree, but it's only a semantic difference. I said, no, it's not. It's more than a semantic difference. Yeah. So he was quite nice. He was quite amiable. But we did. He has got a kind of fixed agenda, and I said to him that as a scientist, I would expect you to have open mind, and you can say that when you have proved it, when I have understood it, I'm open. But you closing your mind and saying there is nothing other than what you can measure and what you can, empirical knowledge, this idea of empirical knowledge, the only knowledge, I think this is too narrow, I said to him. Yeah. So that was, yeah. I mean, I'm not against empirical knowledge. I'm in favor of empirical, but there are other ways of knowing, feelings, intuition. And as I said in my talk, before science came, there was knowledge. Knowledge does not begin, science does not begin with so-called scientific inquiry. Knowledge was there before. And so thinking that only knowledge is scientific knowledge or empirical scientific knowledge is too narrow. And that was the point.
Can I say something to that?
Yeah.
Can I add something to that? One of the paradoxes I think that we're confronted with right here is that there's two ways of investigating the mystery we're in. One is looking out into the object objectively, and one is looking back into the subject subjectively. And they're both ways of knowing. The great thing about science, the thing which it has done so fabulously, is to look out into the object and go, what is it? And what it's found is it's not what it seems to be. It's very, very strange, actually. In fact, it's not even really there. And conversely, what spirituality does is it reaches into the subject, and there's many, as the statistics just said, there's so many ways of subjective knowing things. You know I love my wife, but I couldn't prove it to you. I couldn't, couldn't measure it, but I know it. I know lots of things, as do you. I know I like this music and not that music, and so on. There's different forms of knowing. What I love about Richard Dawkins, why I think he's very, he's making a real contribution, is that he is actually, it seems to me, his great virtue is that he's fighting the Enlightenment battle because it hasn't been won. It looked like it had been won. And the Enlightenment battle is against irrational, pre-rational thought. So thought which is actually, which has yet to move into the 20th century, if you will, or even 19th century. So what he's attacking really is, look, the truth is in this book. Things like that, crazy stuff, things that we really need to leave behind. What the problem is that you end up with a different form of fundamentalism, which is what you might call objectivism. And what I think is what Satish is saying, all that exists is the objective. Well, that's not true. So he's playing a role, but at the same time, he's then becoming a new limit. What we need to do is find a way of understanding this mystery, which embraces the insights which he is bringing, which is, look, we need to leave behind irrational religion. We really do. We really need to grow out of that. And yet, we need to keep alive the real core beauty, which is at the center of it, which is awakening to subjective knowing, to gnosis, to love within, to spiritual awakening. These things are real, and anyone can experience them.
Can I add one more thing? Richard Dawkins is not the only scientist. If you take Einstein, for example, Einstein said, religion without science is blind. But science also without religion is lame. So science needs religion And religion does not mean religion means Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, etc. Religious experience or spiritual values. So without ethical, spiritual values, science can go astray and produce nuclear weapons or genetically engineered seeds or all sorts of other damaging things. And when you have no scientific understanding of values, then you end up in fundamentalism and narrow dogmatism and fixed ideas of religion. So you need both. And you can see people like Einstein and Fritjof Capra and David Bohm and Rupert Sheldrake and many, many scientists are embracing this holistic worldview where science and spirituality, meaning and measuring, subjective and objective are together. I mean, quantum physics is together. Quantum physics says observer and observed are one. Observer affects the observed. So this division which Richard Dawkins is making is not accepted by all scientists. Next question.
Hi. Thanks for talking for us all today and with us. I was wondering, it seems as if each of you must have gone through some kind of a process of realisation to commit your life to the work that you're doing. And in the interests of toppling down this wall of consciousness or to for us to move on to the next step, I was wondering if you could share maybe something about that experience that made you say, actually, do you know what, this is what I have to do.
Well, I just got very bored within the Church of England, actually. And I started to meet extraordinary human beings, such as those that I'm privileged to sit with here and all of you within the audience. And it was you that enlightened me as to something I found just tremendously exciting and beautiful, and something that spoke to my core, and something I felt that I could not refuse but to engage with.
I'm chuckling because we touched on this thread in our group. Nothing like a bit of a destitution to help focus the mind. Or those sort of mild breakdown, you know, when you really hit the, when you really hit rock bottom like that, you kind of come out of it thinking, I think it's true for all of us, that when you go all the way down a path and it simply doesn't work out, at some point we think to ourselves, there must be a better way. You know, and that's the kind of inquiry, it seems to me, that brings us all together and keeps us sort of stripping all this stuff away. There must be a better way. Another specific thing that came to mind is the lovely quote that when you know how to listen, everyone's your guru. You know, so we're all in this together.
Deafness for me was being deaf as a child, and not being able to hear was very strong catalyst for listening. And I think probably for all of us, how our childhood, apparent childhood wounds, or obstructions are very much the catalysts for our own kind of inquiry and so on. So that's really what got me fascinated by listening and sound, because I started realizing people were saying things to me with their mouths, but not really telling me who was actually in there. And so that was really fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And then I just completely bored my headmistress. I remember that, with endlessly sort of trying to change the entire education system, with sort of endless questions around, why am I being taught everything but what I want to know? And who knows where that comes from? I know everybody's been asking that question today. We're all asking that question, where does this come from? And for me, the question is sort of anchored in the question, where that became, where does the sound come from? Where does the sound of my life come from? And that directly connects one with spirit.
Maybe you can have one other question, so that Tim and I have said a few things. So let's have some more questions. Any other question? Yeah, there. Yeah.
The question's not yet really formed in my mind, but I wanted to ask of collective consciousness, and what does it mean to you?
Collective consciousness.
Yeah, collective consciousness, the field of collective consciousness, and how does it impact you? Do you believe in it? What is your experience of it?
Yeah. Tim?
It strikes me that the thing we mostly experience is collective unconsciousness, which is definitely a field. The thing which always makes me laugh about people who are on this journey to waking up to oneness is how much more individual they are than people who aren't on that journey, because they have started to differentiate themselves from the collective. And there's a great deal about this journey which is daring to differentiate yourself from the collective, to think for yourself, to be your own person, to find your own route through, to not be one of the herd. I mean, there was when I was growing up in the 70s, I remember there was this lovely poster which people used to have in their bedrooms with lemmings all running off of cliffs. And of course, lemmings don't actually do that. That was made up by Walt Disney. But nevertheless, it was like all these lemmings just running off the cliffs, apart from one who was going in the opposite direction, going, excuse me, sorry, excuse me, sorry, excuse me, sorry, excuse me. And I sometimes feel like, we are those lemmings. And that, so there's a kind of a differentiation with it, whereby there is a collective and we move it forward by becoming our own. But there's a gravity to the collective, often, I think. One of the reasons we find it hard to wake up is because there's a gravity to the collective that pulls us down into it. And it takes a certain degree of will or individual consciousness to be able to go, no, I want to move in a different direction. So I see it more in that direction, that we're pulling it, we need to pull it up. We need to open it out because we are connected with it. Does that make some sense?
Well, I'm just interested to know what it is for you, why you asked the question.
For me, and actually I maybe I didn't express myself in the way that I meant it. For me, I mean it more as the potential, the collective consciousness potential field, not that those words are in the right order, but rather than the collective unconsciousness that's pulling.
I guess what
down.
I was trying to say is, look, I think that's the place which is pulling us towards it, but we arrive at it through becoming more conscious ourselves. So we can, to take that, for it to become a conscious collective field, we need to become individually more conscious. As we do that, then it will become a collective, it'll become a more conscious field. The state it is at the moment, you can feel it, can't you? It's like, you move in it. We're all in it. And there's a certain, you can feel it in this room. It's different to in a different room. These collectives form, but I don't think there's one there waiting for us. We have to reach out for it. We have to be pulled to ourselves towards it. That's the only way it will form. And it's clearly there because you can feel it already, can't you?
Do you think we're reaching a tipping point in the collective consciousness with regard to spiritual ecology?
Oh, I do hope so. I really, really hope so. I feel like, I don't know, I feel like, look, if we're heading towards that tipping point, hurrah, my job is to be more loving. If we're not heading towards that tipping point, my job is to sow some seeds by being more loving that my children's children will benefit from. Either way, I have to do the same thing. And I don't, how can you ever know? How many people knew the Berlin Wall was actually going to come down? How many people knew that?
For me, the cutting edge question, you see, is not where it all came from, but what am I going to do next? What are each of us, what are we going to do next? Because it is as it is. Whatever it is, here we are. We are in this place. There's a great quote from Arthur Ashe I have on my table now. Start where you are, use what you've got, do what you can. And it seems to me when you strip everything else away, that's what it comes down to. And that's the kind of reason why we're here today. What are we, each of us, individually going to do differently? And there was a conversation I had earlier on about how, all we can actually do is what we can do. We might be able to encourage and inspire and influence this on other people, but actually the stuff that we can do is only the stuff that we ourselves can do. And so what are we going to do? What are we, each of us individually, going to do differently right here, right now? That to me is always the cutting edge question.
Let's have another question. Any other question? Behind there? Okay. Okay, let's take from here. And then next one will be there. Yeah. There. Yeah.
I had a curious thought a couple of days ago. I'm sort of looking at material, and it was around the appearance of mysticism in young children. Like, when does it first appear? So that if each of us could allow ourselves to locate that, it may remind us actually that this has been a part of us for a lot longer than mysticism. Yeah. So the notion is that it actually takes place in childhood. So Piaget is talking about, he's talking about infantile mysticism. And I just thought, well, that's curious. Perhaps more of us could remind ourselves that actually we've been connected. Could you pick that up?
I think what you've said is extraordinarily beautiful, but it's about actually finding that thread back to that point and having that point almost affirmed by those who are around you. I can remember, I think I must have been about 1.5 or 2, and I was lying behind a sofa, and the light was, I was kind of hiding in a little gap, and the light was coming in, and the dust was floating, and it just turned a brilliant silver. And it's one of the most vivid memories of my life. There is no particular purpose to it, but it really consolidated for me deeply at that point that this was the most mysterious of existences, and that I was to, now reflecting on that, honor that. And I'm sure all of us in this room have had those experiences, but we're kind of reluctant to talk about them because people might think we're weird or strange. But I agree with you that they are extraordinarily beautiful and form for many of us the bedrocks of how we have arrived at where we have arrived.
I absolutely, I completely agree with you, and I think probably what most drives the work that I do with the voice, with the human voice, and with sound, and with making this kind of seamless connection between speaking and singing, which we haven't really so much had time to explore today. But is this the sense of wonder that arises out of a seamless communication, which we experience as children, as you rightly say, which we then call, perhaps, we call it a mystical state or something, but it's the most natural human condition, really, isn't it? To be in that state of wonder, and I know each of us has spoken to that today. And it's just incredible when a person, we've just explored it upstairs, when you just take one breath and just, without any thought, just call out, you get to the end of that sound and then you really wonder who that was. And that wondering who was that is a way of triggering this original mystery, I think, this original sense of wonder. It involves disappearing thought, doesn't it, for a little moment in time, and then bringing back thought to observe, as you're saying.
Let's have a question from there.
Hi. Yeah, hi. This is more about our relationship to the earth as such, rather than about consciousness. To any of you, what steps do you think we could take in our daily waking lives towards revering the earth as a sacred presence, rather than the earth as a mere resource to be exploited? What actual steps can we take in our lives? Practices, even?
Yeah. If I can start with this question. I would start with food. And in food, I'll start with bread. If you have heard so many talks today and all the things, now I would like to suggest that when you go home, start to think, learning to bake bread. And don't touch mother's pride, which is neither mother nor pride. If we can connect with our food and have good, nutritious, nourishing, local, organic food, which we can connect with, I think revolution begins with that. Then you start to think about everything. At the moment, we have become disconnected with food. And when you connect with food, you connect with the soil. I would say always try to touch the soil. Every day, go out. Bristol is surrounded by some beautiful countryside. And Rosalind already said tomorrow there's a walk. Go out and walk in nature. That is daily you can do. And when you are in nature, you will start to love nature. And when somebody destroys nature, you'll say, why are you doing it? This is my walking place. These are my trees. I love them. So bake bread, walk in nature. That's your first and second step of changing the world.